What's going on, everybody? You're watching Too Long Didn't Read Filmmaker, where the answers comes first, the reasons come last, but we're constantly and always still learning. So today I want to cover a very important concept. And if you're a beginning filmmaker or intermediate filmmaker, this is extremely important. And that concept is how to make sure you're buying the right piece of filmmaking equipment every time. Now, this seems extremely easy because we have something called the internet, we got YouTube, we literally have people doing tests and posting their results on YouTube. But if you start scrolling through the comments, without fail, you're gonna see either, is this gear right for me? Would you recommend this gear for me? This kind of confuses me a little bit because in the 7-year filmmaking journey, I pretty much bought all my equipment based on YouTube reviews. I've never actually had to ask anybody if the gear was right for me. In fact, all the stuff that I have bought in this span of 7 years, some of it, if not most of it, I still use to this day. And the ones that are no longer in use is because I used them until they were obsolete and simply replaced it with the latest and greatest. So without further ado, I want to help you guys out to make sure you never have to question your filmmaking decisions in terms of what you purchased. So I'm going to take you through my 5 critical steps that I go through every time I buy a piece of filmmaking equipment. Without further ado, let's get started. The first critical step is, what is your budget? Because money does not grow on trees yet. But essentially my golden rule is, do not spend money you don't have. In fact, when possible, try to spend under what you have so that you always have a surplus of cash. Now, this is a little bit harder these days because we have something called a credit card, and certain online retailers do have their own credit card or charge card, and they try to hit you with a, you don't have to pay any interest for 3 years. So you have 3 whole years to pay off whatever it is that you were gonna buy. This sounds cool, but you don't know what your financial situation is gonna be from now to 3 years, especially if you're a beginning filmmaker. And technology is always changing. We're gonna have new cameras, new audio gear, new gear in general within that 3 years. And you're gonna keep trying to do that thing, and you're gonna keep buying stuff within that 3 years with another 3 years to pay off whatever it is that you've wanted. And when that's all said and done, you could find yourself in a hole if it doesn't pan out for you financially. So that being said, do not operate on a deficit. Always make sure that you spend money that you do have, not what you don't have. Now, there are moments where you can spend a little bit more, and that's only if you're a working professional right now and you have money coming in within the next 30 days, 60 days, at most 90 days, so 1, 2, 3 months. I would say try to operate within that 1 month span if you know you have money coming in. That is the only time that I would ever allow you to spend a little bit more to get the gear right now for that job. But if you know that money is not coming for another year or so, then don't buy that gear right now. Wait until you actually have the money to buy it, because then you know you're in the clear. Number 2. What's your problem? Notice that I have this as step number 2 instead of step number 1 because you really need to understand how much money you have to literally throw at the problem. As a beginning filmmaker, everything's your problem because you don't have anything to get started with. That being said, with your available budget, there's 3 categories you need to consider, and I would try to get all 3 categories in one go if you can, but if you don't have that budget, then you need to try to get these 2 categories taken care of. Number 1, your camera. Number 2, audio. When I'm talking about camera, I'm saying your camera body, the lens, a kit lens is generally a good place to start, an SD card, and a tripod. Tripod is kind of sort of optional because if you're really savvy, you can go ahead and stack up a bunch of things like shoe boxes or what have you to place the camera at the right height. But generally speaking, I'd say just spend the $20-some to get yourself a really, really cheap tripod so that you can set up everything right away. If you need an extra battery, go ahead and get one, but it's not necessary depending on your budget. The second category is audio. We need to be able to hear you, and you need to be able to hear yourself when you're creating your videos. Depending on what your budget is, there are some very, very cheap wireless solutions that you can get for like $100. They might not be the best, but they will do. If you are going to be a YouTuber, then you really only need to spend like $15 to $20 to just get a wired one going straight into your camera. and you'll have exceptionally good audio right from the get-go with that. Maybe you want to have a shotgun mic. That's probably a little bit more advanced, and I would say you don't really need to think that far, but generally speaking, a really cheap wireless solution under $100, or even just a basic wired lavalier going into your camera. Now, the number 3 category is lighting. If you have the budget, I would say definitely get yourself a really basic lighting kit. Do not get enticed by LED panels and all that alikes. You don't want to spend a whole lot of money on your lighting just yet. Getting yourself a really cheap softbox with some sockets. You can use LED bulbs from Home Depot, you can use CFL bulbs, you can use incandescent bulbs, but I would say go with LEDs or CFLs to start. And that way you can start working on your lighting. Your first budget kit is just to teach you the art of filmmaking. You're not looking to make any masterpieces here. You're simply getting the equipment you need to learn all aspects of filmmaking. Do not spend whatever it is money you have on just the camera body, then waiting forever, then getting the best lens, then waiting forever, and then buying audio and lights, what have you. Again, do not fall into the trap of spending money you don't have. You're a beginner. Get as much equipment you can from the camera, audio, and lighting category so you can start learning the craft before you become an intermediate filmmaker, which is when you start looking to upgrade what it is that you do have because you've identified a problem that you need to upgrade your equipment. That could be your lighting. Maybe you film a lot on location and you're like, I don't have access to power all the time. I need something that's battery operated. Or maybe you shoot between outdoors and indoors, so you want to have a bicolor panel. Maybe your camera. Maybe you've started tinkering with color grading on just the regular colors that you do get from the camera, and you say, hey, I need a camera that's more advanced with log or maybe raw so that I can really start pushing the image because I already understand everything and that's what I'm missing in my work. Or maybe super slow-mo. Maybe you want 4K 60 to get that nice slow motion when you're in 4K, or you want something even higher at 120 frames a second at 1080p. What have you. You really need to start identifying these problems very specifically as an intermediate filmmaker because step number 3 becomes extremely important. Step number 3, researching and figuring out what products actually is going to solve your problem. And you can do this in many different easy ways, like going to Amazon, eBay, or going to your local retailer store to look at what available equipment is in your budget range that you recognized in step number 1. After that, you go to the awesome world of YouTube where you can start looking at reviews and actually seeing tests and results so that you more or less know what to expect when you buy it. Unfortunately, this is the place that gets completely derailed because the moment you see something or hear something that's negative about the product, your brain goes into a different switch and suddenly say that this product is not right for you, even though it might be. Case and point. I recently did some reviews and comparisons on the Rode Wireless Go. If you have no idea what that is, it's essentially a little wireless lavalier kit so that I can do wireless audio. In fact, you're hearing it right now because I'm not hardwired into my camera. So essentially what I did was I showed 2 tests. One was an open field test and one was an indoor test. The outdoor test was the first one that I showed, where I walked about 15 to 20 feet away, turned around, and immediately my audio cut out. The distance, so here we go. At this point in time, I had some comments that said the Wireless Go was trash because of this problem, that the moment you blocked the transmitter, that you couldn't hear it anymore. Well, I would write back and said, well, is this your actual filming situation? Because on the indoor test, I clearly show that line of sight is not an issue when you're indoors. Facing it, I'm now gonna turn around as I go outside. So if I cut out, you know why. And here I go, I'm opening the door and I'm making my way outside. And now I am facing towards the camera, but obviously there's a brick wall and all that good stuff outside. And what I did was I literally walked into the other room, I walked across to the other side of the building, then I walked all the way outside and you could still hear me. So clearly line of sight is not an issue if you're filming in this situation. To which some of them go, oh, yeah, no, you're right, because I film indoors, so I'm glad to know that's not a problem. Again, this is where people get derailed, because as humans, we are wired to fixate on things that are negative because we want to instinctively fix it. The problem is if you fixate on the negativity of a product, which has nothing to do with your problem that you identified in step 2, your brain suddenly says, okay, I need to buy something that fixes this problem because this is a problem. The reviewer literally showed that it's a problem. So then you buy something that's 2, 3, 4, 5 times more expensive for a problem that had nothing to do with you and your filming situation that you identified in number 2. So again, think about this for a second, because now we go on to step number 4, the next major critical part in this 5-step process. Step number 4, think critically and ask yourself the hard-hitting question with no bullshitting around. So what do I mean by this? You need to first ask yourself, what do you film 95% of the time, and do the products that you identified in step number 3 actually fulfill this 95%? I'm gonna go ahead and give you that Rode Wireless Go example again. So let's say I don't do any of the other filmmaking stuff that I currently do, and that YouTube right now, what I'm doing right now is what I do 95% of the time. If we look at that Rode Wireless Go, and my brain suddenly fixates on, oh no, if I'm shooting outdoors and I have my back turned to the camera that I cut out audio, well, that's a problem and I need to make sure I fix it. But if I'm shooting indoors like I am right now, where is that 5% actually going to come into play? Never. You can't base your purchasing decisions on the 5% off chance that you're going to be outdoors in the wide open, filming with your back facing the camera. If I break it down like that, you're probably like, well, who actually films that way where their back is facing the camera? Exactly. Especially if you identify that 90% of the time you're filming indoors facing the camera, and the review obviously shows that if you're indoors with line of sight blocking everything that you can still hear yourself, then that's no problem. So that's what I mean. Think critically, ask yourself this question to counter any negative derailing thoughts you might have had in step number 3, and ask yourself this no bullshit question. Now, the last thing for number 4 is this a luxury item or is this a necessity? Luxury means, it'd be nice to have, but I don't necessarily need it. And these are things that we fixate on for no reason. So some people say, oh, I need a lens that's really, really wide aperture so it's good in low light. But are you shooting in low light all the time, or are you here filming all that stuff? Again, luxury items. It's nice to have, but I don't need it. You want to always buy for necessity, because that's the problem that you identified in number 2 and hopefully number 3. Always buy necessity, never overspend by buying luxury items. Okay, now that we've made our way through the hardest 4 steps, now we get to the final one, which is a little bit easier on the brain, and that is to simply determine whether or not this piece of equipment that you're buying is a nice long-term investment. Now, when it comes to long-term investment for filmmaking gear, lenses win out big time. And then I would say your audio gear, your lighting equipment, and then finally your camera body, which I place it at the least of importance. So for lenses, for example, generally speaking, a lot of people will say, well, you should try to get yourself some full frame lenses if you can within your budget, or Super 35, because these 2 lenses will cover the most popular sensor sizes when it comes to video and cinema work. And if you buy something even smaller, like Micro Four Thirds cameras that I'm using, or any other types of sensors that might come after that that's smaller and cooler, then you know your lenses are gonna work across multiple forms of camera bodies, and therefore you don't have to buy different lenses for different types of cameras. So that's one way of explaining it. But I would say lighting is probably the easiest way to explain, because let's say you want a lighting panel like I have here right now, and this one's battery operated, so I know I can use it as a YouTube setup light up, or I can take it on my narrative film sets, and therefore one light can serve multiple purposes. Now let's fast forward 5 to 10 years from now. Let's say this light panel finally dies, and I decide to look at what's available going through my first 4 steps. Well, should I buy the latest and greatest? Maybe I don't. Maybe my filmmaking setup never has changed in those 5-10 years, and that I simply just need to replace this light if it's still available, or something that's close to it. If it so happens that this light is available and this technology is still out there, but it's much cheaper because, you know, people don't necessarily buy that technology, like incandescent light bulbs. Incandescent light bulbs are out there. They're obviously still the cheapest options, and they've been around for many, many decades, but they're still out there and some people still buy it. If that's the case, this light here for the last 5 to 10 years might have paid itself 10, 20, maybe hundreds of times over, and then 10 years from now I suddenly buy it, the same one. Essentially, I have made that light make me money for so many years, and then simply having to replace it is no big deal. If you always think about the long term, you're always going to spend less money because you're making more money than you're spending, and ultimately you're going to end up having a surplus of money instead of a deficit. Okay, so with all 5 steps out of the way, do I actually have a personal story to show you that those 5 steps actually worked for my needs? Yes, there is. Towards the beginning of this YouTube channel, I was actually using my narrative wireless lavalier setup. The problem was it was bulky, it used batteries, and one time I didn't know the receiver lost battery halfway, so I literally recorded a bunch of video with no audio. So I told myself, okay, I need to get something else. So I figured out what my budget was. I identified the problem. I wanted something that was just hardwired into the GH5. It didn't need to have batteries. I just needed to plug in, clip it onto myself, and call it good. Went onto Amazon in step number 3 to look for said products that would actually work with a DSLR and not a smartphone, because I did my research and there's a difference between TRS and TRRS when it goes into your camera. And then went to number 4, no bullshit. Is this thing going to fulfill 95 to 100% of what I wanted it to do, which was be able to capture my voice for this exact YouTube setup? Yes, it did. Is it a long-term investment? Obviously, because at that point I said, I want to do stuff on YouTube for as long as I can, so this needs to survive all the way through. Well, so I found out what product I wanted, spent $15 on this little lavalier mic, and that's obviously way cheaper than the Rode Wireless Go that I was using for the video that you're listening to right now. I'm saying was using because if you couldn't tell the difference that I switched from a $200 wireless system to this $15 that's now currently running into my camera, I rest my case. So what's the bottom line here? The bottom line is, if you train your brain into thinking of all these 5 steps with everything that you purchased, whether it's for filmmaking or anything that you do, you're always going to save money and you're always going to get the right piece of equipment for you. But it's actually going to train your brain one step further. Because all 5 of these steps are training your brain to essentially problem solve for the long term and the short term to some degree. So let's say you're on set and one of the piece of equipment either stops working, you don't have it, or maybe a second team is using this lens and you're left with these lenses. Well, because you have such a vast knowledge of what every piece of equipment is capable of and what it's not capable of, you're going to be able to still get what you need without the actual equipment that you came with. Now, obviously, this is not the kind of situation you want to put yourself in all the time, but should the situation arise, your vast knowledge, critical thinking, critical problem solving, and understanding the ins and outs of everything that you have purchased is going to help you and allow you to save the day or save the shot. So with that being said, if you're a beginning filmmaker or intermediate filmmaker, I highly suggest you really train your brain on all 5 of these steps. And if you know any other beginning and intermediate filmmakers that could benefit from this skill set, then go ahead and share this video with them. And that pretty much ends this week's video, guys. If you want to check out all the gear that I use for my YouTube and narrative sets. I basically have most of them reviewed. I will link them all down below along with their Amazon affiliate links. Again, if you do purchase them through my Amazon affiliate links, it costs nothing extra to you. It just gives me a little compensation so I can continue making videos like this for you. And as always, guys, if you have any questions or comments, go ahead and leave it down below. I will get to them as fast as I can. And until then, like, subscribe, and share, and I'll see you guys in the next one.